We're going to be talking about learning in the broadest sense. So not always formal, not always from experts or trainers, and sometimes even not organized. So we can think of learning as accessing information to help us make sense of the world. And a great example of this is Craig Cockburn's earlier talk, which I managed to catch a bit from. And he mentioned that in conferences, we might experience cognitive load. So not just from the content, but from the different speaking styles and workshop styles. So it's something I'd never thought of. So thanks, Craig. A little bit of housekeeping for this session. It's a panel discussion and it's being broadcast live on YouTube. So if you could turn off your cameras and your microphones for now, then that will help us a bit. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat. We've designed little bits of chat interaction throughout, so we're not on our own. It's not the five of us on our own. So yeah, before we dive into the topic, I'll introduce myself and our guests. My name is Pilar Orti, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, where I help managers transition their teams to remote in an organized fashion, not in a COVID fashion, through consulting, training, and facilitation. And more relevant to this, I'm also the host of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. So when Jen Riggins invited me to submit a session for this conference, I thought, let's get a few people I enjoy talking to and who have a lot to say about the world of remote work, and then bring them into the conference. So I'm delighted to have today Beth Maguire, Gonzalo Silva, Morgan Legge, and Marcus Wermuth. Hello all.
Hello.
Hey there. Hello.
I'm delighted to share the space with everyone who is in the room with us or watching in the streaming. So delighted to share this space with you. As I was saying, we've structured the session as a panel discussion, but we'll bring you in at intervals through the chat. And we have a slot for contributions from you at the end through questions, comments, reflections, whatever. So let's get cracking. I'm going to start by introducing Beth Maguire, who is a learning and development professional and a neuroscience results-based coach. And Beth has worked in the area of learning and behavior change for over 10 years. And recently, she's finished a course in psychotherapy. She actually focuses her efforts on building globally inclusive and accessible solutions and experiences to help people grow and thrive professionally and personally, mainly to unlock their full potential to maximize their performance, success, and well-being. So actually perfect for this panel. So Beth, as part of your introduction, can you tell us where you are today and your favorite way of learning?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for welcoming to this panel. Very excited, great discussion. I am in Dublin in Ireland, but I suppose that's what I love about now being virtual. We have this amazing global panel and group around, and we're really accessible to everyone. And Mike, I suppose for learning, I think it's probably the moment of need. So when I learn the most is like when the problem is big or the change is big and I need to get a solution and the urgency is rather large. And then I think in terms of the process, I love learning from people. So you'll probably gather the fact that we're on this panel. I love engaging, meeting people and learning from others as well.
Thank you very much. And next we have Gonzalo Silva, who's the CTO at Doist, creators of Doist and Twist, and champions of asynchronous communication. And well, Gonzalo's been working remotely for over a decade and managing remote teams for most of that time. Everything is, I have a friend who says nothing happens more than 10 years ago. So maybe this is the thing. So Gonzalo, welcome. Where are you? And what is your preferred way of learning?
Well, I'm in Porto, Portugal, sunny today, thankfully. And the way I learn, I like to learn by doing things. So, and I've learned how to manage a team doing this. I've learned how to manage managers of teams by doing it. The thing that I try to be is very aware of the various stages when we learn things, right? The first stage when everything seems easy and, we're overconfident usually. The second stage where everything seems super hard we basically have a lot of ramp up to do, and the final stage where we're finally growing and comfortable in the process. Being aware of this helps me learn on the job, so to speak, not in an incompetent way.
Nice. Thank you. Lots of there. Marcus, we're going to introduce Marcus Wermuth, who works as an engineering manager at Buffer, the fully distributed company, which is very well known and respected in the remote space for its transparency and thought leadership. And Marcus' current focus is leadership and management in distributed companies, and especially how we can build more psychological safe teams in a digital world. He's also a leadership coach trained by the Coactive Training Institute, and he writes a lot, you should read his blog, about virtual leadership. He mentors and coaches other remote supervisors. Wow, we're going to learn so much today, audience, and facilitates international workshops about management in distributed teams. So welcome, Marcus. Where are you and what's your preferred mode of learning?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be. I said it before, it feels like being in a group of friends here with all the panelists and you, Pilar. I'm in Munich, Germany right now. And how I learn, I want to give a philosophical answer first. I think I like to learn by living, because my favorite quote from Albert Einstein is, you stop living when, no, you start, sorry, messing this one up. You stop living when you, no. I'm
living totally when you stop learning?
You start dying. That's it, Pilar. There you go.
So you start dying when you stop learning.
Exactly. So
that's more hardcore than you stop living.
No. Yeah, I meant this one. So I'm sorry about that. But kind of that's the way of life for me to kind of approach it that way. And I think we all do to a certain extent. But I have to agree with Gonzalo that I definitely like learning by doing. And if there's a big problem ahead of me, I kind of like to dig in and read a lot. So reading for me is also kind of a big learning thing.
Yeah, you read a lot. Follow Marcus for reading recommendations. Thank you, Marcus. And we also have Morgan Legge, who's formerly the Director of Operations and current Head of Sales and Success at Convert.com, which is a 100% remote first SaaS, 100% remote first SaaS company that makes an A/B testing tool. She initially came to Convert to transition them from a flat organization to holacracy. So loads of learning involved there. You are crazy, more going there in a virtual company and changing structure. So here comes the stock question for you. Where are you and how do you prefer to learn, Morgan?
I am located in Montreal, Canada, and today we are joining this live stream with my dog.
Yay!
Who you're going to hear. He suddenly woke up. It's overcast with beautiful fall day, and I love to learn by doing, but that's actually the kind of the second way. The first way is having really robust conversations, dynamic, deep dive conversations with people, and preferably with maybe like a whiteboard or some, sketch paper, and really, involve your whole being in that. And then the follow-up to that is to jump in and learn by doing.
Mm-hmm. Great, excellent. So thank you very much. If I could summarize, and people in our room with us, get ready to get on the chat very quickly, because I'm going to ask you, how do you like to learn? But to summarize while you get that thinking, when it happens seems to be important, learning from people, learning by doing, learning by living, and having robust conversations and something to capture those conversations with. So in the chat, we would love, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. We're going to give the time to you. We're going to give the attention to the chat so that you can have a read of what anything else that's coming up. If nothing comes up, that's fine too. But I just wanted to give a little bit of attention to the rest of the room, just to see how the rest of the room likes to learn. So if nothing comes up, that's fine as well. So we've got, I won't say any names because we're live streaming. So we've got learning by experimenting. We've got books and conversations, learning through meetups and webinars, by doing and following examples, podcasts, learning by doing and trying, reading, asking questions. I love how some of the similar content is coming up, but the words are very specifically different. Gamification. Good. Let's see, we have two more and then we will continue with the panel. Excellent. by helping others and experimenting lots of different ways depending on the task, sometimes reading and thinking, sometimes watching, and then trying. It really depends. Excellent. So it depends on a lot of stuff, and actually what's lovely is how different it all is, which makes it very complicated to learn in an organization. All right, thank you very much in the room. So let's we've set the scene. Let's hear a bit about from the panel about what you do. So what does your job entail, your role? Let's turn specifically to your role in the organization. So tell us a bit about it and what you've had to learn along the way and how that happened. So a little bit of your experiences. I was going to, well, actually, let me start with Marcus because his microphone is open. So Marcus, what does your role entail, and what have you had to learn along the way?
Yeah, so my role entails a lot, and especially around people management. I'm an engineering manager, much more focused on the management part, less on the engineering part. And I fell into this role, funnily enough, by being an engineer and raising my hand and saying like, hey, we're worried about our team. There's no one leading this team. There's no one managing this team. And Buffer was in a little transition period at that time. So yeah, things were shifting and I kind of raised my hand. And so I fell into this job, not really knowing what people management is. So there was a lot I had to learn. And initially what you default to is you read books, you read articles, you talk to other people. So that's what I did. Or in that transition period, I kind of got all the books that I needed to read upon. I chatted to other people in similar roles that weren't necessarily remote, but I wasn't so much concerned about the distributed part rather than the people management part. So I chatted to other people. I kind of built my little support group and kind of grew from there. Mm-hmm. One big thing that, I don't know if I want to go into this already now or later in the questions, but one big thing that I did too was getting a leadership coach. And for me, that was kind of the start of a more transformational period for myself, even until now, because I'm a big fan, and we might touch on this later, I don't know, of developmental theory, where you go through certain stages in your life and where you look onto things in a different way. So I think initially I was very concerned with learning all the tools, all the processes and all the different things. But I started to notice that, yeah, it's not just about that. And this is rather the easy part. It's more so about, you know, the self-awareness and learning about yourself that makes you a better leader. Mm-hmm. And that made me a better manager in that perspective. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's a lot there about very interesting that you're conscious of the learning cycle, whatever that is, which means you need different kind of things. I'm paraphrasing for you just. Anyone else? Does that resonate? Is it different to someone else? Beth, you're nodding.
Yeah, well, I'm still thinking of Marx's quote around dying, and actually it's kind of linking in with that a little bit. But I think for me, most my learning is kind of at that place of uncomfort. So I always say like the start of life is really like at the end of your comfort zone. So I'll not talk about death, I'll talk about life. But for me, I think there's tons of learning, like as Marcus talked about, having coach, going through studying psychotherapy, being a psychotherapist coach, I learned so much. But the ones that really stick out for me are often those like really uncomfortable moments. I'm at Hubspot now just 2 years. So the first year was definitely a learning curve. And I came in to be responsible to build out our professional and personal development program globally. And I worked consultancy side for years, done this with many companies. And I was like, piece of cake, you know, just do the same. Did a bit of research. It was like, you know, copy and paste. Mm-hmm. So number one, made an assumption, which we all know is like the first failure in place of you should not be. And I think for me, when I think about the learning lens, or maybe the 5 moments of need of learning, I definitely hit that place of having a really big problem. I wasn't getting the buy-in. I realized you can have the best product in the world, you can have an amazing vision, but if you don't have stakeholder buy-in, it's not there. And I had always had that. So I just forgot about it. In consulting, it was always high tier 1, urgency, importance, and all that good stuff. So for me, the first step was recognizing the problem, seeing my pitfalls and assumptions, and actually getting uncomfortable with that, and then trying to solve that essentially. And that's also looking at, we talk about a lot of the times of learning is around change, which is obviously really relevant in this year. For us in the pandemic, for me, it was the change going from consultancy to in-house. I just didn't think about that being so big. So really getting under that and actually starting to reassign my, you know, expectations, going to stakeholders and saying things like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this? Everyone will say developing and learning is 10 out of 10. But then when you say, how urgent is this? Well, then suddenly it's like, oh, well, I have this, I have this, I have this. It's the same reason developing ourselves time is always the thing that gets in the way. You know, oh, I intended to go to that webinar, I intended to listen, but then the kids started screaming, the dog started barking, or whatever it might be next as well. So really coming to terms with that, and then really setting my plan and doing the research, talking to other L&D folk and learning from others, and then applying a plan that's far more likely to succeed in the environment that I've taken into it. So a lot of uncomfortable learning, but probably valuable.
And can I just pick on something up? So Marcus works for a fully distributed company, and very interesting that what we heard from Marcus about how he learned and experiences didn't have location. You know, it doesn't matter, the location. Beth, you work for a company that has both her headquarters, and you'd say that your office, the remote employees are a third of, you know, of the office space. What was there any learning to be done around that?
Yeah, hugely. I think for I'd always be very in touch with looking at virtual. And one of the things we say is it's so important to be inclusive and accessible. So we wanted learning to be, you're accessible wherever you are, whatever time zone. If you're a parent and want to like dial in at 12 p.m. because you're, you know, minding your kids at home, just accessible to all the different groups. And so really thinking about how we can have the just-in-time learning and demand, but then still meeting the needs, especially in times like this, where people, as we've all talked here, I think you see it in some of the chat, people want to connect and learn from each other. We've all referenced that too. So making sure you have offerings and things around there as well. So it definitely opened our minds. You find by default, you might just set up a session in the headquarters and you're excluding instantly by doing that. So rethinking and not making assumptions. So there was definitely a huge amount of intent behind that.
Excellent. Thank you. Gonzalo, your company is again another fully distributed, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what is your role, and what did you have to learn?
Well, actually, I see myself in the words of Marcus as well. Like I found myself accidentally taking on things, which actually led me to think a little bit about risk. Learning is also about taking risks in some instances. And in my case, there were different stages. We did most of what we did so far a bit accidentally. Like in the beginning, we were just having fun building a product. Eventually, we had too many people for not having any leadership. So I took on team leadership. Eventually, we had too many teams without like a joint culture and leadership. So I took on the CTO role to kind of like glue together the technical engineering side of the company and the people management too, like Marcus has said. The thing that looking back, I think is also important, besides making the time that Beth mentioned and really well, like we always underestimate how much effort learning takes. And it always feels very important, but we don't prioritize it very consistently. And as leaders, we need to create this room in our teams and in our companies. But I hope that's something we cover later on. But eventually, there is some risk taking, right? Like you need to be open to not know something, to maybe even look like a fool while you're doing it. So yeah, this is also an important part of learning, is being available to feel this way.
Thank you. Thanks, Gonzalo, for the reflections. Morgan, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your role or your latest role, however you wanna frame it, and tell us some of the things that you had to learn as you went along.
So my most recent role is the head for sales and success at Convert. And I think, my journey to this place it's interesting, but I'd actually prefer to focus on what I started doing at Convert, because I think that kind of shapes the whole context for everything. So I came to Convert initially to move us from a flat organization into a holacracy powered organization, which basically is an operating system that leverages distributed authority to grow your company. And we did that, but I came on board not knowing anything. I didn't even know what holacracy was. And it was an entirely bootstrapped project. And for me, the part that was really intriguing was this ability, this opportunity to be paid to learn, to figure it out. And the journey through that, not only filled with curiosity, but I think the thing that is really, really important is having the intellectual humility to be able to go in, learn, and make mistakes, and then know that you can learn so much from so many different people. And when you go through that cycle, you can't fear failure. You can't fear looking silly or any of those things. You have to be, at least for me, willing to go in and jump in. And definitely our implementation was filled with a lot of false starts. Like I kind of related to what Beth was saying. I came in, it was like I learned everything I could about holacracy. I started doing it and implementing it. And I realized partway through our journey that like I had created this like beautiful graphic of what I thought Convert should look like, but that's not what holacracy is. It's a reflection of where you are, and then the people in the organization are the ones that change that based on the need. And so that was a big learning to kind of step back and have to change your plan and realize, hey, you know what, I just went through this months of work and this isn't correct. Yeah.
Nice. So with all that in mind, seeing how varied it is, what different things you're all paying attention to, because we're kind of all in the same space about how we learn and, wanting to, basically the four of you are taking charge of your learning, but how it's coming out is slightly different. So with that in mind, how much should we be formalizing learning for individuals in an organization? Or what's the responsibility of the organization to help the individual, and what are the different ways of doing that? So I will take this as a discussion. So the four of you, if you want to speak, raise your hand, because I can see all of you now. Morgan is going first. Excellent.
I'll go first. I think that, it's great to have processes in place, but I think at the very core, you have to have a culture of learning, and you have to give a space for that. So it's well and good to say, oh, there's this money available and you go through this process. But if people aren't sharing, there isn't, especially in a remote team, people aren't making noise about what they're doing, and there's no space to share that, it doesn't really mean much. I think part of the magic about learning is that we can do that, and then we're also helping to build that curiosity and share it with the people that we collaborate with.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm just going to pick up, actually, Marcus, Marcus.
Are you sure?
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to plus one what Morgan was saying about, Buffer. We have the growth mindset fund, a certain amount of money that you get every year, but like there's always some people who don't use it because they don't know what to use it for. They don't know what to do with it. So if there's no one talking about it, no one like mentioning what's possible, it won't be used. And in addition to that, I think maybe another talking point there was also that Robert Keegan, I'm obsessed with him right now, who like talks about this adult development theory. Just in a talk that he recently had on YouTube, I saw that he mentioned that leadership actually has this really good potential to like build this foundation for development or growth in a company. So I feel like it's also a certain responsibility that you as a leader has to kind of help your team, help your direct reports or the people around you to kind of leverage and lean into that, where you can be kind of like a person distributing that information. So I definitely think that we as leaders, I know this is my role, but we have kind of a responsibility to kind of lean into this and help others to kind of develop.
Mm-hmm. Great. Gonzalo.
Yeah, I think these are all good points, and I completely agree with them. We have some control over the culture. Leading by example is a great point, but also the structures and the incentives we create. For example, the check-in mechanism we use at Doist is like just once a week, totally async, but it's public. But besides focusing on the work that we have done and that we plan on doing, it also focuses on the most important thing you've learned last week. And this kind of like creates this culture where even if you're not maybe investing a lot in learning, you see all of these people sharing all of these interesting things and you want to participate in that. So it's actually quite common that we see people ramp up within this process. And then as leaders, I also think we have some responsibility to create room for learning. And we have done this poorly in the past at Doist, for example, where we talk about how learning is super important and we must always be learning and growing, but then we're always overloaded with work, right? All day, every day. And there is no room for anything. So for example, something I'm really proud of, we've started doing this year, and it's going really well, is blocking 1 month per year for people to do whatever project they want. The only thing we want is that they have a plan and they have some kind of deliverable, even if the deliverable is learning something. But this really puts people in the driver's seat to have control over their own project. And we see a lot of people learning a lot of new things through this. But of course, it's an investment. It's 1 month per year. But still, we're getting a lot of value out of this, because if we don't invest in our people, who will?
Yeah, nice. So really put your money where your mouth is, and really give very strong signals if that's the culture you want to build. I just want to hang on to something. So Morgan talked about the spaces to share, and Gonzalo, you started to talk about something very specific about you do something once a week where you all share what you've learned or something like that. What does that look like in your distributed organization?
For us, it's a thread. So we know a lot of teams use different work methodologies. They have different mechanisms for check-in. We have these threads where teams share, what they have done last week, where each person from each team shares what they have done last week and what they plan to do this week. Originally, this was just a check-in tool, but then we added this learning section, like, what interesting thing have you learned last week? And it's kind of like repurposing the tool a little bit. But it's been amazing to see how much people learn and how varied these topics can be.
So you can have big initiatives and incentives. You were talking about incentives also, Gonzalo, to learn, which are like 1 month that you dedicate to whatever. But you can also have small ones like changing the word and saying, what interesting thing. Okay, oh, right. That makes me stop, reflect, share, all part of that learning cycle. Yeah. Anything else from the panel? Beth?
Yeah, I think the word formalize, I have an adversity to, because I think it's that structure, it's in the classroom. But I do think there's a bit of both and, which I think a lot of us are alluding to in this discussion. And again, a lovely quote, but I would say, like, the deeper the roots, the greater the fruits. I think we need a foundation. So just a lot of us have explained examples of quick growing companies where you kind of fell into a role and you probably learned the most there. But we always have this debate of, well, how much pain is okay to learn and how much giving them complete autonomy and flexibility is okay versus, come on, we've all now had to relearn the same thing because we're not sharing the learnings. We're having silos here. We're duplicating efforts. So I think this is a really big part. And I think so it's kind of the both and, as we talked about, starting to create the culture of learning, leaders practicing what they preach, experimenting, failing, and that good stuff. And then again, as we talked about those initiatives, we do loads of those really nice things from your learning of the week. And thinking about, the same reason Google reviews are really popular. When we go on a TripAdvisor, we check the reviews. How can we start to share those reviews, how you spent your tuition fees or what learnings you have and how you can share that, because that's going to be really powerful to get people engaged as well.
So as people who are in the lead in some shape or form, how do you experiment and fail as a leader? I mean, how does that look and how does that create that culture of learning and role modeling?
Transparently.
And what do you mean by that, Morgan? Like you become like a hologram?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you model what you want to see from other people, right? Like, so if I'm not taking the initiative to use the budget that Convert gives me to spend it however I want, and I have that money left in the pot, then what am I teaching the other people that I am working with, right? Like, it seems kind of, it doesn't work, so I think that, going through and sharing, like this panel has talked about, sharing what you're doing, what you're learning, how you fail, right? Maybe the missteps is super, super important.
And what you're also providing the space to learn, not people to be learning from their own experiences, but they're learning from you also. This is something that the informal learning, and this is what I think people who've just gone into distributed or remote because of COVID are worried about when they talk about culture. I think sometimes it's about that some of the behaviors that we see, they're afraid that we can't see them anymore. So something like a learning culture needs to be managed differently, I imagine. Marcus, you're nodding. wisely.
No, I mean, the culture is very important. I mean, we live our values. We don't just put them on our wall, and we have one of our values being like self-improvement. And, you know, that shows in various aspects. And I think that's kind of a key thing, you know, like living that culture and really trying to map it into all the various fields in your company, whether that's leadership, that's just getting together and all the things. I think, yeah, it has to be ingrained in those, even the small moments. Otherwise it's just going to be hard.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Well, I would like to ask a panelist if you have any questions for each other. But of course, before giving you the floor to ask questions to each other, I'd like to see if there are any questions in the chat. I do believe that we do have another 15 minutes because this was a 45-minute, just in case there are any confusions. So any questions from the chat? Anything you would like to ask Morgan about how she learned in her organization when she had to actually learn a whole new structure, or Beth, how she manages both the in-office space with the remote, or Gonzalo and Marcus about their managing a distributed team, or a team actually, or anything about their learning. You are very welcome to send the okay. So there is a question here. Have you done these do what you learn days? What do we mean by that, Kadri? Do what you learn, what? Oh, sorry. Have you done these do what you want to learn days? Panel, anything resonates there?
Yeah, I think a good few companies do this, and I think we copied a lot of this from, I think it was LinkedIn, a few others, but different departments do it differently, or we have what we call grow days, because, you know, you're evolving and growing. And we really invite anyone to do whatever. And kind of I think we talked about this earlier. We have tuition fee that you can spend to go off and do more in-depth course. It might be that you're doing something on your own well-being and you're learning about yourself. That can be very different. And then the one main thing is what we're going back to again, is to create that culture of learning. The expectation is you then come back and you share, and you either recommend, or what was your top tip? What was the one thing you could take away? So we're trying to cultivate oh yeah, I don't just have to learn by reading a book or sitting in a classroom. There's other things, and getting inspired by others as well. And I think it's just a lovely message of autonomy and, you know, being vulnerable and open to learning, which is the environment that will cultivate that learning.
Yeah. And Marcus, you've done a lot of taking, like you talked about the leadership coach right at the beginning in your introduction, because this fits in quite nicely with that. I mean, it's not a specific point in time like Beth is suggesting, but how free did you feel to do that in the organization, or this is something that you did on the side, something that you shared?
Well, the first coach, that Buffer changed a bit since then, but the first coach that I took, I just did on my own. I got paid it on my own. I looked for it on my own. But Buffer since then changed, and like our growth mindset fund that we didn't have at that time can be used for coaching now. We have various resources and coaches that, you know, we can approach. But yeah, I decided that on my own, and it was probably the best decision on that journey of growth and learning for me.
Mm-hmm. And why was it the best decision?
Because it's like what I tried to explain before. It's not working or learning about the processes and the tools, but learning about me. And being a manager, working with people, you should first work on yourself and become a better human in that sense, and then work with other people. So that's why for me, it kind of put me in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beth, that's your specialism. Helping professionally grow professionally. So how do we help people grow personally in a distributed company?
Yeah, and I think that's the number one thing. I think sometimes, you know, you go in. So even when I went back to study psychotherapy, went to help people, but I came out just having helped myself so much. So what we're really trying to encourage is, especially in the distributed kind of, is all the opportunities of doing that out there, and trying to create that level of, firstly, vulnerability and openness, which I think starts from the top. We often have leaders sharing how they learn, their screw ups, their failures, and how they're learning from that. And then I think it's the cultivate of the conversations you have to create the opportunities for people to say, okay, I can go out and I can kind of learn this space that's a bit uncomfortable for me. You know, and we're even running stuff like psych safety and trying to understand that. And it all comes back down to, are you willing to put the mirror in front of your face and do the work, you know? And if you create a space that allows that and you feel comfortable to bring your true self, which is many things, I think that's where the opportunity, and it doesn't matter where you sit or where you are, as long as you have that trust. So again, it goes back down to your managers, as you talked about. your team? Do you feel open? Do you feel you can be honest? And that's a huge part of them being able to do the work and grow in the way we've all talked about.
Great. And Morgan and Gonzalo, and anyone in the room with us, please, if you have any questions, because if not, I'll carry on being nosy. So do put your questions in the chat. We still have a few minutes. But Morgan and Gonzalo, a word that Beth just used, conversations. And Morgan, you used that before. And Gonzalo, you've hinted at something around that. In a 100% distributed company with different time zones, how practically do those conversations look like, Gonzalo?
Well, for us, it's all async. I think that's a bit of a kind of like a part of our brand at this point. But something that's really cool around learning and async is that a lot of our communication is very thorough and thoughtful. We write a lot, like, big paragraphs of things. So the nice thing about this is that we take time to put down our thoughts, refine them, edit them before we share them, which is nice because when we're sharing the things we learn, it really prompts another reflection. Like, what exactly have we learned? How are we better off because of this? And how can we convey this message to the other people? So in terms of how we approach communicating this, it's also really helpful because it's usually long form, thoughtful communication.
And do you get much interaction around those thoughts? Does it vary? Do some topics get more interactions, more conversations around it than others? Or
Honestly, it's not high interaction, generally speaking. I think async is not the best tool for like high interaction because I think what you're thinking about is kind of like, the real time thing of, bouncing ideas back and forth. And this takes a bit longer, generally speaking, but it's quite common for something interesting to pop up and then another conversation spins off just to focus on that. So, what did you mean by that? Like, can you tell me more about this? Yeah, that happens quite frequently too.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Tell me more about this. Isn't that a great role modeling question also? Why do you laugh, Morgan?
I'm taking a class right now modeled off of authentic relating, and it's called a meta relate. Anyway, it's not entirely relevant to this, but it was just interesting to me because these are prompt questions that have come up a lot recently in the last couple of weeks. I was going to tag on to what Gonzalo said and say that, a lot of our communication is also asynchronous. I think we're 11 time zones. I don't count anymore. I believe Gonzalo is in every time zone. And we leverage video a lot. So not just, when it's real time, but when you respond to somebody, yes, we have those thoughtful long form conversations, but we also record video. We use a variety of tools, and my preference is Loom, but it's really nice to go in and be able to not just, I think that each format has its place, right? So I really like that when I'm watching someone's video response, I can get a sense of their voice, their body language, and all of those cues that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have in writing, where our language of operation is English, but I'm only one of two native English speakers on the team. So I would say that generally the proficiency is quite high, but we run into miscommunication around maybe idiomatic turns of phrase and things like this. So being able to kind of correct yourself in real time, and real time asynchronous video is a really nice way to share.
Nice. And with that thought, so I'm going to start wrapping it up, saying, of course, something that we've all had to learn who've been in this space and the people is to develop all these new ways of communicating and having the choice and learning how to choose how we communicate. Before it was in person, for some of us, the phone like this, that kind of thing, the letters, take a few days. And now we have this choice. That's a huge learning curve also, that actually some of us, we've just learned it as we went along. So panelists, I'm going to ask you to be thinking about a 30-second wrap up from each of you, and I will like to hear from each of you. While you think about that, your last words of wisdoms, I would also like to invite anyone in the chat who wants to say something in the chat to the rest of the people. We're very welcome to do that. So Marcus, kick us off.
I'll try to be short. I think I won't say a specific thing in how to choose, but I think it's important to understand that in distributed companies, they're all humans that we work with, and each of those humans is different. Not everyone likes to watch a video. Not everyone likes to watch an essay of things. Combining things, understanding who you're communicating with, I think is very important.
Good, thank you. Beth.
Yeah, I would probably just say, I think especially as you just said there, Pilar, adapting into this new world, try and pick one or two things that you think will be like the low-hanging fruit. I think a lot of companies are, okay, we're going to move to Loom and we're going to set up Slack, and there's so many things going on, and you're not seeing then, because of A, it resulted in B. So I'd say just pick one or two things and do it really well with feedback, as Marcus said, and focus on that, and you'll start to see the rewards.
So, thank you, Beth. Gonzalo, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to maybe go back a little bit to something we discussed early on and talk again about leading by example. And this spans to everything. Like if you have a learning day, all of your leadership team should be leveraging this learning day. The month thing I mentioned, we have everybody doing this, from the CEO to everybody in the company. So, and this is really important. Like there is really no better way to show that something is important than everybody engaging with it. And another one, it's just like a very old joke. I think learning has been a big thing for humans for millennia now. And I remember when I was in college, there was this joke going around, which is, you probably know about this, which is the corporate dilemma, which is asking, what if we train our people and then they leave? And the worst thing, is what if you don't train them and they stay? So I think leaders should think about this when they think about the incentives and how willing they are to create this space for their teams.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And Morgan. Yeah,
I'd like to continue about what Marcus was saying about how there's people behind the screen, essentially, like all of these people, especially since the context of what we're sitting in is this pandemic work, and there are many people who are new to something that the five of us here have done for a long time or are very comfortable doing. My best advice is to learn your tools, the tools that you know how to do the work, but really dig into the tools that you're using to not just communicate with your team, but anything new that's coming into your remote work sphere. And then also to really try to work louder and work more proactively with people on your team, because the death of remote work is silence, and we all have to get a lot better at whatever type of communication you are comfortable with and you want to receive learning or you want to share it is super important to not just survive, but excel in a remote environment.
Thank you very much. Well, panelists, audience, thank you very much for your attention and your earlier contributions. Thank you to the panel, Beth Mcguire, Gonzalo Silva, and Morgan Legge, and Marcus Wermuth. And thank you to the wonderful dynamic organizers of Agile Tour London for making the space for this conversation today. Thank you very much.